Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is Burning Questions. The topic that set the internet on fire this week, or at least I hope it will, is how is virtual reality changing the lives of everyday people in a war zone and beyond, I suppose. We are joined here with Victor Samoilenko, who is the CEO, and Bill Cole, who is the fractional CEO and also international representative for Aspichi, a VR company that functions in Ukraine and worldwide. Why don't one of you guys tell me what it is that Aspichi actually does?
First of all, Julia, thank you for inviting and having us here. It is a great pleasure. And a few words about Aspichi. I would say that, Aspichi was invented as a company which will implement something absolutely fantastic, which is audio-visual teleportation for the people worldwide, so they can experience world or get possibility to immerse into any other parts of the world, professions, and in that way get an experience which is not accessible for them now. But because of the full-scale invasion, we refocused our work and focused on the mental health catastrophe, which is already happening in Ukraine, caused by the war. And it is our main priority to scale psychological services at the moment here to support the nation and ensure healthy future of it.
So, in layman's terms, you're helping civilians and I'm assuming veterans to deal with PTSD and similar impact of living in a situation that is the full-scale invasion by Russia, right?
Yes, absolutely. We are dealing with all segments of our population. Probably there is a limitation, and there is an area we are not yet touching. That is psychology of the children, which is really a sensitive area, and we are quite responsible in our work. And we are doing this because VR technology is being researched for the last 20, 30 years and is considered as very impactful mean to influence psychological state of the person.
Yeah, see, that's very interesting. And I think it's really cool that you're here to talk about it because I think the idea in the masses about virtual reality is more that these are the types of things that you buy for your teenage son to play, I have a VR set and there is a great game where you can like slice tomatoes and, vegetables that fly at you. And it's a cool workout. But I think that's the idea that most people have about VR or sort of far-fetched movies like, The Fifth Element, but I'm old, which is why I'm mentioning it. And virtual reality being like a means of communicating, viewing social media and stuff like that. So it's very, I think, important to show the world how virtual reality can be used for so much more than just, gaming and spending your free time. But it can be, there are limitless possibilities, and I'm sure possibilities that we haven't even explored yet. So how are you implementing these VR treatments for people? Do they have to come to your office? Is it a traveling situation, or do you distribute them? How does that happen?
First of all, I have to agree that VR technology is underestimated and clearly perceived as it was promoted in commercial ways as something which will allow you to get into certain artificial environment and entertain yourself. Mm-hmm. So it's much more bigger, and it's disrupting the way we are perceiving world in terms that let us put just for consideration. So the information we are receiving from through the TV, mobile phones, it's just a small window which representing the rich 3D environment, which is quite natural for the human being. So VR, that is 360 window to the world, and we can put there whatever we want. And that is a first step which has to be taken for the mental health rehabilitation. We have to provide to people a safe environment to understand their feeling, their state, and practice improve their state.
So actually, something that Bill and I were talking about off camera is how VR destigmatizes mental health. Because, for instance, in Ukraine, we are a very developing in terms of psychology nation. And, you know, going to a therapist only recently became normal and cool. And if you were talking about it 5 years ago, people would probably look at you like you have 3 heads if you were going to a therapist. So Bill was trying to explain to me how working with soldiers, especially because, of course, there is going to be toxic masculinity and stigma where, you know, therapy bad, trying to get help with your problems also bad because you're a man and you're supposed to, you know, be able to handle it yourself. So why is VR different? And as a supplement, obviously it doesn't. So I fully understand that at least for now, virtual reality does not substitute therapy, but it supplements it. But how is it destigmatizing therapy and why?
Important, really important point. It is so. We are not a single nation, so that definitely we don't have a kind of long-term culture using the psychological services, and it is not fancy here in Ukraine, but. Basically, because of the war and the scale of that problem, we are highlighting something which is quite common for the world. So let me say there is almost 1 billion people worldwide who are suffering from the mental disorders, and majority of them are stigmatized and actually not ready to acknowledge that there is something. So let me put it in that way: something wrong in a person from mental perspective. Yeah. So it's just a part of nature, human nature, not to accept the problem, especially when the problem is related to the mental state. So destigmatization is happening through the substituting necessity, actually, to share your issue or problem and get it common or shared with other people. So stigmatization, that is a social problem. And when you're communicating with the technical mean, it's much easier, basically. You are still at yourself, and there is something soulless, I would say. You are sharing your problem, and there is a kind of guarantee that it will not be shared further on.
Well, yeah. Also, I think so. I do have a psychology degree myself, and I used to study abnormal psychology, so that includes PTSD. I don't practice. Obviously, I'm in a very different field, but I am very curious about psychology, and so I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of veterans, particularly about their experiences, right, and about why they don't necessarily go to therapy, at least in Ukraine. They don't necessarily go back to their Western country. So and I'm talking not about Ukrainian veterans. I'm talking about, for instance, foreign volunteers, right? So they have a hard time, A, finding therapists who speak English here, B, it's stigmatized, and C, the therapists that we have in this country that are trained or actually quite very, very untrained in a lot of aspects to deal with someone who had now entered civilian life off the battlefield, right? These are usually women like myself who have nothing to relate to these veterans to. Mostly they're men, of course. I mean, we do have 30% of women in our military, but it's still 70% men. And so they have a very hard time relating to these therapists. So something that we talked about earlier is that virtual reality kind of takes that off, because you don't have to relate to someone and you don't have to find people that can relate to you. And it's something new and cool. So you don't necessarily feel like you're going to an office to deal with your trauma, you feel like you're going to experiment with this cool new technology, and it feels like fun maybe in a way. So it takes off the pressure off of, especially, I mean, civilians as well, but I think especially veterans, of having to go and deal with your mental health trauma, because a lot of them also don't want to admit that they have mental health trauma, which of course they do, because it's impossible not to. Like, most of Ukraine's civilians are traumatized, let alone people who at some point have been on the battlefield, right?
Right. Let me try and help here in regards to sort of the way I see the stigma being broken by VR. And Ukraine is not alone in regards to stigma, the stigmatization of talk therapy and psychotropics, and the way patients are treated from a psychological perspective. The U.S., as an example, it's a huge stigma. And so what we have done, what I have been focused on with Victor and the team, is to try and bring this incredible technology to the U.S. And so we now have our first customer. Our first customer is a assisted living facility, series of facilities in the U.S., which is a managed care facility, acute care facility typically for the elderly, for those that are suffering from acute behavioral issues. And so when we started studying this client, started working with this client, we realized that there absolutely is a stigma against talk therapy. They don't enjoy it. They don't want to participate. And so when we brought VR to the table, it was neat. It was cool, even for a person of that profile. And then I think where the stigma is really broken is once someone tries it and they're comfortable with it, they want more and more and more. Why? Because it's highly effective. It's highly effective. Aspichi has proved out the effective rates here in Ukraine, and now we're going to start to see that proof in the U.S. as we bring on more and more clients. So it's in my opinion, it's a tremendous stigma breaker. I have some personal experience as well with my own children. I can go back in time. I have 2 sons who suffer from severe PTSD based on a traumatic event, and if I could go back in time and offer them VR as a process for recovery, it would have made the world of difference compared to, Patrick, I want you to spend some time with this man or woman for the next 40 minutes. And he's like, I want to go. Yeah. So if I could have intervened and said, can we let him play with this VR? Would that be okay? And Patrick would have been like, this is great.
I think there is also a form of novelty of you being the subject of sort of like, I don't want to say a test of something new, but sort of like you exploring something new and some new technology, because it's interesting. It's cool, for lack of a better word, because you get to be treated in a new way that could not, it's not a drug, right? So it's not something that can be administered and it could go wrong because there is not enough research. It's sort of like, it's cool because you get to go to your therapy appointments and put on goggles, and there is kind of no limitation to it, because every single time that you go there, it's not like you're going to hit a wall and run out of things that you can try, because it keeps developing. It's a very limitless field. I keep using this word because I think that there is so much that can still be discovered and can still be done, that I feel like if I were someone who would be attending these sessions, it'd be interesting for me every single time, because it would keep just going and building. Is VR and therapy the only thing that Aspichi currently focuses on, or are there other avenues where you're implementing virtual reality to solve problems?
I do believe that, first of all, we are doing several things. There are side projects which are really important and unleashing the potential of VR technology. The scope of the opportunities and possibilities we are showing to the world is really, really huge. It is a pleasure to make such serious steps in that area and amaze a lot of our international partners with our work. And I can mention invention of the immersive diplomacy, basically prolongation of the concept of audiovisual teleportation, when the people from abroad can actually feel themselves in Ukraine, and they can visit cities they would never visit. And it's going, it could be, at the moment it's provided as a recording, but it could be in real time as well. So there will be a possibility to experience another country, and we are just using it to expose Ukraine as a country to the world, as a nation, and as well to show what does it mean to live in war. So that experience never can be explained, that what we have learned.
Yeah, of course, it's something that you need to see. We've seen various times politicians from other nations coming to Bucha, for instance, and drastically changing their opinion on the amount of aid and the limitations of aid to Ukraine, simply because they have seen the horrors of experiencing war with their own eyes. And would you think that that's something that you are trying to do through virtual diplomacy?
I would say it is already done, and we are in progress. So we are changing mind of the politicians. We are supporting fundraising campaign, showing what is actually behind this request, and people seeing that just at a click, they're changing their mind and starting to support country, and it's turning on quite a wide range of emotion. People's becoming to feel connected to that issue and to that problem. So we are turning on a kind of humanity, or discovering humanity inside them.
Here is a question for you. As a journalist, how can I use VR to, in your humble opinion, how can I use VR to influence people worldwide in my work, right? To spread my messages, or how can I use VR to make my work more impactful?
And in journalism, I would say there is a complete different perspective we are offering. So when we are talking in media and journalism, we are basically saying that there is either company or the person who capturing certain information or experience, getting it through himself, and then translate it to the wider audience, to the different people. So what we are offering to that area is basically to exclude personal judgment and opinion, and just show what you experience around yourself. So what you have to do, and in that case, every person can be a journalist, because he can just provide the experience in a full way to other people, so they can put themselves in the shoes of that person and actually feel what is happening around.
That sounds a lot like what Mstislav Chernov was trying to do with 20 Days in Mariupol, where he himself said in various interviews, with myself included, that he didn't want to influence anyone's opinions. He was just trying to film as much as possible of what he saw, so people could feel like they were present during these events and they could make their own conclusions about what was happening. So he wasn't necessarily documenting it to explain it to people. He was documenting it to show it to people so they could experience it for themselves as much as possible through his camera lens.
Yeah, through documentary. So, and it could be used, for instance, to understand in what does it mean actually war crime. And we are hoping to extend our cooperation further on and work with the civil organization and governmental organization to provide the reach, kind of spatial context behind the certain papers and facts. So judgments or judges can relate himself, basically, go through that fact.
Do you think that, because I actually got very curious, do you think something like 20 Days in Mariupol can be taken and turned into a virtual reality experience for people to have a much sort of stronger grasp on what was happening on the ground, with like enough material and video, obviously?
Probably not. It's as a technical, as a person with a technical background and engineer, I can explain it very easily. So if you do have a kind of 2D picture, so you can not make a spatial out of it because you are just lacking in information. It was not captured.
Yeah.
But it could work vice versa. So when we are getting the spatial environment and content, definitely it could be translated into the 2D one.
You can flatten it out, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you think, so one of the things that I think everyone is going to be interested in, since we've been talking about all of these possibilities of VR, is, and I think people don't think about it, like FPV drones, right? FPV drones function with VR because in order for it to be first-person view, you need virtual reality goggles. How is virtual reality changing defense tech? Because I'm sure you have academic knowledge on this. And how can the research in Ukraine help countries worldwide? Because I think that, unfortunately, and it's something I don't like saying, right, but it's a very good research playground for a lot of different spheres and a lot of different industries.
Starting from the last point, so specifically in the mental health, we are expecting to make multiple discoveries about the way how the brain works, because we are capable to understand and getting so unique data sets about the behavioral and reaction of the persons from the nation that it's putting Ukraine in a kind of very advanced positions in terms of the empirical research of the psychology and behavioral issues. And you are very right that in the war circumstances, it's basically such a pressing factor that a lot of innovations are happening just in that time. And the drone war, it was actually invented in Ukraine, so we started it. And good illustration of what can be provided by the VR headset. So we are talking about VR just to highlight it as a mean to represent information. But what is there? That is a wide area of applications. One of it's FPV drone pilots, and what is happening in order to drive the drone in 3D space, you have to be able to spectate the 3D space, and it's only possible in a fast way, in a natural way, with the use of the VR headset. So we can expect that such kind of surveillance applications could be applied to the ground drones, to the drones scouting, to basically to the people, allowing them to translate what is happening around them. In a war, especially for the fighters, the pressure of circumstances and current conditions and focus on execution the missions limit their view to quite a limited tunneled, I will say, perception of what is happening. They really have to be focused in a narrow angle, and they are losing a lot of information around. So we can imagine that there could be remote people helping to look around for the guy, keeping an eye for his back.
Yeah.
And all that is a kind of a new type of the information we can collect as an experience and use for the education. And VR headset, and that is another area for the application of the VR headset, it's basically education. So there are proven facts about it, I would say, from just our experience that person is perceiving information 10 times faster. I would say it's a subjective thing, but it's order of magnitude basically for perception of the information. And there is quite an interesting psychological background on it. So when we are learning something, we are actually pushing ourselves to get this information in, and brain is a pretty lazy thing. So it's pushing that information back, and we have to find a motivation, the proper one, or get really curious about what is thinking, what we are learning about. What is happening in VR? We are actually just directly bypassing the experience related to this certain professional area, and definitely it could be used in the military, especially in Ukraine cases. But let us just make a note for the NATO countries who didn't participate in the active actions for the last 70 years, if I'm not mistaken. And if there will be a need, they definitely are not up to date to the modern war.
Yeah, because their soldiers do not have active combat experience, but if they can experience it in VR, it's going to be closer to the real thing than it would be if they were just learning on, I don't know, at a makeshift or make-believe battlefield, right?
I believe there are professionals, but the quantity of those professionals is very limited. So there are missions, but if we are talking about the full-scale war, it's basically engagement. And yes, here you are absolutely right.
How do you think, so the other day I had an opportunity to test out a tiny little bit of Aspichi tech for mental health. So I personally am diagnosed with panic disorder. I'm medicated for it. I also have crippling anxiety and ADHD and a lot of other things. So it's fantastic to be me. And one of the things that Bill showed me was one of the exercises with butterflies where it kind of slows your mind, which is an amazing thing because I think it's one of those things where when you first put it on, you're just kind of like, oh, this is silly, right? But it asks you to like follow butterflies, and it kind of walks you through your thoughts. And what you end up realizing later is, first of all, it feels like a game, right? Because you're supposed to do some little tasks and it's all colorful and interesting. And at the end of it, you realize that you've slowed down your brain and you've actually, and your brain is no longer like overwhelmed and overworked because of the 5 minutes that you've spent in a VR headset.
I can attest, she did slow down. Julia slowed down.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
I was watching closely.
A lot of people might not believe that. But what I'm trying to say here is, I guess, a good conclusion to how VR influences our daily life is we've talked about the big picture, right? And an average viewer who watches this, how could they expect having VR in their life to be useful and how it can impact their individual existence? Because I think we all view we all view things that are worth our time or worth investing into or looking into through the lens of how it can benefit ourselves. So yes, VR can benefit the battlefield in Ukraine. It can benefit like the greater mental health. It can benefit the research for mental health based on like the example of Ukraine and let's say PTSD and how we can treat that in the United States. It can also give NATO countries the ability to experience war without actually going through it. But how can it influence, let's say, Mike, who is watching this program right now in his daily life?
There is another issue with the perception of VR technology. It is considered as a way to escape reality, like it has been shown in the Player One of the Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
But what we are trying to do is to show that VR is actually a mean to enrich and make better self in many ways. So being mentally healthier, being a happier person, feel yourself. So there is an effect with the modern life and people. We are just losing yourself among all that information, media, etc. So you can be with yourself, and that is one of the aspects you've experienced. You can educate yourself in a more efficient and natural for the person way. You basically can travel around the world without spending a big buck. And probably I can continue, but
I think there are three things. I think there are three key things. He touched on a couple of them. I think one, just the term immersive.
Yeah.
It's completely and totally immersive. There's no way to be distracted. There's no way to think about other things or see other things. So that's really important, that it's an immersive experience. And it's also time-bound. It can only be 10 minutes, and it's 10 wonderful minutes, right? So it's immersive. The second piece is, as Victor described, ultimately, with telecommunications, you'll be able to go anywhere at any time in real time. And I think the third part is the topper, which is, over time, AI will take over in regards to that experience. And so it will become much more individualized for the person. So they will be able to train their VR device to work with their needs and their sort of hopes and dreams in using VR. So I think it has a ways to go, but we're off to a great start. And I want to say, sort of in conclusion on VR here in Ukraine, what Aspichi and this man has done for this country is amazing to me. I'll give you some numbers. So the scale shows us, the scale numbers show us that there's 1 billion people in the world right now that are suffering from mental health disorders. So you're not alone. You're not alone. None of us are alone. And
Thanks for letting the whole world know.
Absolutely,
that
yeah.
all of us have
well,
been
she was very open, so I'm very open. So we know that half the population, at least half the population in Ukraine, is suffering from some form of mental health disorders, right? And so Aspichi right now, today, is deployed in 40 to 50 clinics here in Ukraine, serving 1,000 patients a day. That's a total of 365,000 patients in a year, helping them to stabilize, to recover, to have a better life. Those numbers are only going to increase as Aspichi grows. We're going to be able to really fill that gap, going back to the stigma. Just like the US, Ukraine doesn't have enough therapists, and so VR and Aspichi will be able to really fill that gap. And we hope that over time, those numbers will go up into the millions. And then over time, we hope it's highly effective and the disorders are helped quite a bit.
I mean, I definitely witnessed it myself, right? When we visited the hospital in Poltava, every single doctor that has seen the VR headset wanted it to be present in their clinic so they can try it out with therapy on their patients. But so sort of to conclude here, right? I want both of you to say, what do you want people to think about when they hear virtual reality?
Definitely get rid of the virtual part of it. So it is about the reality, which is so beautiful, so diverse, and it is presented at the Earth. So think not about the inventing something new, just make a first step and find yourself in that reality.
So I think virtual could be substituted by supplemental reality, and that would be maybe better.
I would say undiscovered reality, or reality beyond your reach.
And Bill?
My 18-year-old cousin in Atlanta, I did the same thing to her that I did to you. I had her go through a trial experience. That 10 minutes changed her life. So VR, in my opinion, at least the application that Victor and the Aspichi team have put together, changes lives. And so for me, VR is a wonderful technology, but what's really important is the impact that VR can have on people's lives. So that's what is tremendous for me, and that's one of the big reasons I'm here in Ukraine.
Well, thank you so much for coming over here and telling us about, giving us a glimpse into this reality that a lot of us haven't seen. And specifically, thank you, Bill, for giving me a literal glimpse into the virtual reality of Aspichi. And I really hope that, I can experience more of it. And any conclusion thoughts that you might have? Or was that...
It was really an interesting discussions, and I've got some new ideas, and definitely we touched just the top of the iceberg. There are many things to be discussed, and many things to do and to create. So thank you for that conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you. I hope that we're going to sit in the studio again a year from now, and we're going to need a lot more time because, VR never stops and never sleeps. And I think it's going to only continue developing. So I will see you next week with the next burning question. And for now, I really do hope that you give this one a watch and you really think about it and try to understand how important the field of virtual or undiscovered reality is to all of us around the world.